All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Fantastic. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Prather. Super excited to be here with you this morning. I've been a flight simulator enthusiast and developer for over 20 years. And this morning I've got the honor of talking to you about generative AI. This has been a big buzz within all sorts of industries and communities. So today we're going to look at the relevance for what this could mean for flight simulation. I'll start with a brief story. I'm reminded of a time, 1998, flightsim.com, Kev's Cockpit. Kev's Cockpit was a story that was posted on a gentleman in the UK who successfully built a Boeing 767 flight simulator in his home. I did not realize at the time that that story on that day would forever change my life. And here we are over 20 years later, and I'm still trying to replicate that same feeling in my own home. Kev's Cockpit was really started this all for us. He also started with one of the earlier electrical interfaces. He actually took a keyboard and put electromechanical solenoids over each key so that when, for instance, you raise the landing gear, the solenoid would physically press the letter G, and that would raise or lower the landing gear. So in his report, he said something very interesting. He said, hey, I think it's possible to wire to a keyboard, but I don't know how. And this intrigued me. A double E, computer science guy, computer geek, I loved it. So I gave it a try, and it worked. So basically, I took a keyboard apart, noticed that it had these two membranes that looked like they had PCB circuit board traces on it. So I took those out, replaced it with a wire, and hallelujah, a letter G with no solenoids. It was great. But very quickly ran into challenges with that, right? What do you do about toggle switches? What do you do about LEDs? 7-segment LEDs. It had a lot of limitations, but it was foundational to now what is possible. That became known as keyboard hacking, and I released that report in 1998 as well, following on to Kev's Cockpit. So before we get into generative AI, I just want to talk a little bit about the simulator that has fueled my addiction for so long. This is what it looked like in actually 99. It took me about a year of planning before I even had kind of the courage to get started. I didn't have any of the experience in construction or woodworking or electrical systems or any of that. So this is version 1.0. You can you can actually see the grain from the MDF wood that is not very realistic, but you can see generally speaking the switches are where they're supposed to be. Square versus round. I took my mother's TV. I don't think she was happy, and took the CRT out to make an FMS. Never really worked that well. The rudder trim, best part of this, actually was a piece of paper printed on an inkjet with a fluorescent light stuck behind it. So that is also inoperable. And you can see it over here at night. It looks great. But again, it was crude. But for 1998 to be able to get in it and pretend like I was flying and have that feeling of immersion and have switches to flip was, again, life-changing. Over time, getting more involved with members in the community, and I do want to give a shout out to some great guys here. Ted in the back that I've known for a very long time, a fantastic Airbus builder. These three gentlemen right here, 737 builders. It is through this community that we start to exchange information and knowledge. So I started learning about mechanical design. So these are some designs that I drew up in SolidWorks for the instrument panel. So as you can imagine, 1998, they weren't retiring any 777s, right? First flight, 1996. So by 98, it was still with the new aircraft smell on it. So after kind of putting this into SolidWorks, working with machine shops to use CNC water jet to now cut out the metal parts, fabrication shops to create the complex structures using 3D printing, learning about different surfaces, different aluminum alloys, which ones cut well, which ones, what kind of paints to use, etc. You can start to see it becoming more and more 777-like. And of course, this would be years down the line. You can see all of the kind of raw metal laid out here, and then you can see as it starts to all bolt together and then get painted, and then screens start going behind it. Now it's starting to take on the shape of a flight simulator. So fast forwarding, this is what it looks like as of fairly recently. I will not use the word thankfully, but during the pandemic, a lot of the airlines kind of stopped doing the long haul 777 flights. And so after nearly 20 years, we started to see the shells and liners for the 777s becoming available. This particular one came off of a Malaysian 777. But when I received it, it sat in the garage for about 6 months. It was literally a pile of plastic. Again, I had no idea how to put this together. Fortunately and thankfully, my next door neighbor used to do some house framing work, saw it one day and said, let's get after it. And so we literally hammered and nailed and tacked and hammered and nailed and tacked until everything looked right, made the adjustments. And so now you can see fully enclosed, glare shield from the real aircraft, Microsoft Flight Simulator graphics. The other thing that I'll point out here, and this is a big part of why we're here today, is making the transition from homemade parts to aftermarket parts from some of the great companies that you see out there to now building an obsession for OEM or real aircraft parts. It's always been kind of the holy grail, I think, for a lot of sim builders. And in fact, I remember getting these clocks. These are from the real aircraft. And I remember saying, when I started, we didn't even have LCDs. We had the 19-inch CRTs. And I remember saying to myself, we will never see a day where we'll be able to fit a screen with a 1-inch clearance next to this clock. So I sold the clocks. It took years and years. And I remember putting that LCD there and thinking, holy cow, why did I do that? But as with anything, you wait long enough, things come back, the clocks came back, and now they're installed in the aircraft. Same thing here, OEM instruments here, the actual standby instruments. When you send them the right data, everything lights up, and it creates a really, really cool experience. So again, now my obsession is with OEM aircraft parts, and now the challenge is around how do we interface them. Just a few more kind of showing behind the curtains, right? This is the shell structure that you can see here. So unfortunately, at the time when we did this, lumber was at an all-time high price, so I probably could have built a small plane for the cost of the shell. But the bottom line is you can see here where we're taking like 2x4s, 2x10s, 2x12s, bolting everything together while literally one guy is sitting there holding a plank and a beer. We nail that in place, we adjust, and then we kept iterating until we had a shell in place. You can see some of the superstructure that was in place temporarily to hold things in place while we tacked everything in. Again, until we had kind of a hull, we had to use surfaces to prop things up. And lastly, just a few more photos of the simulator fired up. You can see here with the avionics on, the autopilot, also from a real aircraft. That had to be completely gutted for different reasons. So now that's all based on an Arduino compatible interface, which is, again, what we're going to be talking about today. Flight controls from throttle tech, pretty much everything else here other than the PFC yoke, pretty much everything else here is either custom fabricated or OEM. So why are we here today? I did want to provide an overview of my project just to kind of say, okay, this is the why, right? This is why I do this, and I know why so many of us do this. Now we're going to get into the how. So we're talking about generative AI. Again, generative AI, no matter what industry you're in, you're probably hearing a lot about ChatGPT. And so we're looking at how we can utilize generative AI to integrate some of these parts into our simulators faster. Now, I will say there's some great interfaces out there, right? Sebastian is here talking about his interface today. Really what today is about is for people like myself, right? There's some people that take their car to the mechanic, and there's some people that like to roll their sleeves up, get under the car, change their own oil, hoist out their own engine, and understand the engineering and science behind it. So today we're going to understand the science behind why generative AI. So this picture really resonates with me. Many of you probably remember when the Tesla Cybertruck was demonstrated to the world. And at the onset, it was, this truck is bulletproof, and the windows are shatterproof. Watch this. I can hit it with a baseball bat, and nothing will happen. Well, kind of. The windows shattered on the first swing, as I remember. The reason why this photograph is relevant is level setting expectations for today. Live demonstrations rarely go as planned, but I'm going to take a risk today and do a live demonstration because for any of you, or just by show of hands, how many of you have used ChatGPT? Okay, a lot of you, right? There's power in seeing the real-time nature of it. It's very different seeing, hey, here's a PowerPoint presentation with what I did with ChatGPT versus saying, let me ask it a question and show in real time what that answer is. So we're gonna try to do this in real time. It may work, may not work, but we're gonna try to make it work. We're looking at 2 parts today. This is a passenger signs panel from a real 777, straight out the aircraft. Literally still has the original wiring. And for panels like this that have a lot of switches, knobs, these are a great candidate for what we're doing today. But also, this is a smaller panel, the inboard display panel. I like this one because it has a combination of things. It's got the rotary switch here, which gives me 3 inputs. It has a push-button Cori switch. These are pretty coveted among the Boeing builders. And it's got a built-in annunciator that's 28 volts, which adds a little complexity. Obviously can't power 28 volts from an Arduino. And they're also limited to, I believe, 200 milliamps in current. So that's another challenge that we have to overcome. So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to need in order to do this. Starting with the hardware, I won't read these line for line, but I said Arduino or compatible. I personally have stopped using Arduino about 10 years ago in favor of Teensy. I have personally found Teensy to be 10 times the power and half the size for the same cost or less. It's about the size of a stick of bubble gum and does you can run full-blown Arduino programs on it. Absolutely love Teensy, so I would recommend that you can use Arduino, Arduino Mega, Micro, Nano, any of those, but my hardware of choice is the Teensy, currently the 4.1. Switch panels, of course, whatever you're trying to integrate. So in this case, just in case our physical hardware doesn't work out, I've just got a breadboard with the same type of I/O, the same switches, the same LEDs. It basically does the same thing, okay? DuPont wires. So DuPont wires are interesting. In fact, I have some here. Somewhere. Okay, here we go. DuPont wires are basically breadboard wires. You can find these on Amazon. Male to male, female to female, male to female, whatever you're trying to connect to. Although not ideal, I know a lot of people, you get OEM aircraft parts, it's harder to find the Canon plug oftentimes than it is to find the actual part. I know we have a lot of talks about that, right? We found this part. We've got these 2 Canon plugs that are specifically 32 pin with a 1.5 inch diameter. Try finding that. Even I don't have the answer to that. So my answer has been, if it's a toggle switch, these are like 28 gauge, so I wouldn't put any high voltage or current to them. But especially for switches, it just so happens that the female DuPont cables will slide tightly and snugly over the pins on a Canon plug. So if you're just looking for something to test or to connect that with, DuPont wires are a good place to start. Obviously, you want to get Cori pins if you can. A lot of times you can find those on eBay, but DuPont wires are good for a test. Multimeter, why? It's also very difficult oftentimes to find the pin out. So we've got the panel and someone says, well, what pins do I use? Boeing is probably not going to share that with you. But if you take a multimeter and literally, put one, just go pin by pin. It's a slow process. And put one lead on each pin, toggle the switch and see what happens. Over time, with enough patience, you can find that, oh, this position here is pin 1 and 6. This one is 1 and 7. This one is 10. Okay, 1 is my common. And then that's how we come up with oftentimes our pin outs. Software, a lot of this is self-explanatory. Obviously, to develop with Arduino, you need to use the, you don't have to. You can use the Arduino IDE. Alternatively, there is a program called Visual Micro. It's a plug-in for Visual Studio that works a treat because now you can use the Visual Studio debugger and things of that nature So actually, I'd probably recommend Visual Micro over the Arduino IDE, but you can use either one. Visual Studio is my choice. I love C#, but you can do the same thing. Thanks to Generative AI, it knows just about every language out there. But again, my tool of choice is Visual Studio. GitHub Copilot, just quick show of hands. How many of you are familiar with Copilot? Okay, not so many. So what GitHub has done is they have taken the power of generative AI and wrapped it into a plugin called Copilot. I can literally, as I'm writing my code, I can write a comment and I can say, hey, write me a formula that changes, binary into decimal, right? Or that converts degrees into radians. And literally, when you hit enter right below that, GitHub Copilot will write that function for you, and it uses your code. It trains on your code, so it uses your variable names, etc. I have found GitHub Copilot is like having a peer programmer sitting right next to you. It is very, very powerful. I highly recommend it. ChatGPT, again, is my tool of choice for generative AI. There are some other ones out there. Google has one. Is it Bard? Yeah. So there are a couple others out there, but again, ChatGPT is kind of the more popular one right now. It's free to use and really powerful stuff. FSUI PC is, again, my tool of choice for interfacing with Microsoft Flight Simulator and gives you a high level of compatibility. Alternatively, you can use SimConnect. Or if you're doing X-Plane, you can actually ask Arduino to write code, ChatGPT, to write Arduino code that communicates directly with X-Plane, which is a neat little feature in X-Plane as well. And then, of course, your flight simulator of choice. So today, these are kind of some of the steps that we're going to go through. We're going to skip the continuity test. We know what the pins are. I'll spare you the multimeter test for the next 10 minutes. We're going to connect our Teensy, and we're going to ask ChatGPT to write a program to basically collect the data from our switches and send it somewhere. Then we're going to develop another application that's PC-based that's going to allow us to receive that data. We're going to push that data into Microsoft Flight Simulator. We're going to read it back, and we're going to control an LED, hopefully. Again, there's a lot here, but what's more important from my perspective than, again, this working or not, is the mindsets and the iterative nature of how we're going through this. Generative AI is conversational, which means even when you ask it a question, it may not give you the perfect result the first time. You ask it to refine. That's what I really want this audience to take away from today, is how we're going through that process. And then I'm going to try to leave plenty of time for questions because, again, I really want to hear from you. But let's take some time now and let's see. Wish me luck. And actually, I'm sorry, before we get into that, I do want to talk very quickly about prompt engineering. There are a couple of things that are important to know. There are more than these. And actually, I would recommend that you Google effective generative AI prompt engineering. There's a science to it. So for instance, be specific. If you say to ChatGPT, hey, write me an interface for when I flip this switch, raise the landing gear in my flight simulator, it's going to make a lot of assumptions. It's going to assume what flight simulator software you're using. It's going to assume that you want SimConnect. It's going to make all these assumptions. But if we get more specific, then we get better responses. So we want you to be as specific as possible. It also says reduce kind of fluffy descriptions, right? Again, this is all about being as concise as possible. Name things, lead it. If I know that I want to convert latitude and longitude, and I know I want to use Haversine formula, say, hey, write me a function that converts latitude to longitude and use the Haversine formula, and it will do exactly that. In fact, I did exactly that. ChatGPT came back and said, hey, I know you asked me to use Haversine formula. We recommend a better way, but if you want me to use Haversine, I will. After I saw Haversine, I tried the recommended approach, and it was actually pretty good. So again, you want to be as concise as possible. And then the last one is to refine. So as we said before, the first time that you ask the question, you may get marginal response. you may get things that are off. You have to refine. It's a conversation. All right. Let's try this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring over the ChatGPT interface. All right. So let me get a new chat going here. And I am going to give it some prompts here. All right, let's try this. I'm going to copy and paste here to save some time. So on my breadboard, I have 3 switches connected collectively to pins 30, 31, and 32. So what I'm going to ask ChatGPT is to write an Arduino program that has switches on pins 31 and 32, monitor the position of each switch, and anytime one changes, send the pin number and pin state as comma-separated values to the serial port. Now, actually, I'm going to take some of this out because that's pretty specific. We're just going to do the first part. And off we go. So in about 30 seconds here, it's already defined my inputs, and it's already printing out the positions of it. Now, because I know Arduino, I do see a couple of little problems. Number one, it's looping through, and it's just printing them out. It's not pausing, it's not stopping. And what you're going to get if we run this, which we can, I'm going to copy this code into the Arduino IDE. And we're going to upload that. Let's see, later, upload. Okay, what we're going to find in probably the next 20 seconds or so, once it's done compiling the sketch and uploading the sketch, is it's going to start running output at the bottom, doing exactly what we told it to do. And you can see this is a very short, very straightforward program. But let's see what happens. I'm going to pull up the serial monitor. We're going to connect to a board. All right, there we go. So down at the bottom, you can see switch 1, switch 2, switch 3. They're all zeros, but you can see it's just blasting this data across the serial port. It's meaningless. Nothing's changing. Now, if I come to my board and I press a switch, what you'll find is, supposedly, let's see. Let's try this one more time. Okay, I know what the problem is. This is why this is iterative. This one is a little bit obscure. You'll notice at the top, it says pin mode input. It should be pin mode input pull-up. Arduinos and microcontrollers require pull-up resistors. Right now, I'm basically shorting the pins to ground, which is not a good thing. So ChatGPT kind of missed that one. So we're going to go back and have a conversation. And we're going to say here, hey, please add pull-up resistors. All right. So now we told ChatGPT, please add pull-up resistors. And now it comes back and it knows that to add pull-up resistors, it has to change input to input pull-up. I'm going to copy that code, come back to my IDE, paste it in, and we're going to give this another go and see what happens. And so again, this is why it is an iterative process. Now, you can see, when I push switch 2, it changes from a 0 to a 1. Same thing if I push switch 3. Same thing if I push switch 1, 2. any of the switches that I push, you can now see that they're changing from a 1 to a 0. Okay? But again, we weren't specific enough. So now it's still blasting this data every couple of milliseconds across the serial port. So we're going to go back and refine this again. So I'm going to say, okay, we're going to say only send the message when something changes. So now, again, it says, hey, to send this only when data changes, let's modify the code. It goes through, it creates this nice looking code for me. And you can see now it's comparing the previous states. So it's literally saving the state of the switch, comparing it. If it doesn't change, it doesn't do anything. So let's copy that in and let's see what happens. Copy that. And we're going to upload this code. And what we'll notice in the next 10, 15 seconds or so is that down on the serial monitor, it should be a lot more quiet. So instead of blasting data every couple of milliseconds, what you'll see now is it saw it flip, and you see now the timestamps are no longer changing. But if I come and push a button, there's switch 3 that went from high to low. And now it went back high because I let it go. Same thing with switch 2. And you see as I'm pushing the buttons, they're going to 0. Remember, Arduino can either be pulled down or pulled up. So this tells me that I'm pulling the switches down to 0. All right? We're going to make one more modification on our Arduino program, and then we're going to flip over to how we get this data into C#. So we're going to say, send the result to the serial, let's see, anytime a pin changes, send the pin number and pin state to the serial port as, separated values. All right, so for everyone online, I just told Arduino that anytime the switch changes, send it to the serial port as separated values. And it's already done. So let's take that code and see what happens. And if this code is successful, then we now have an Arduino that is monitoring the state of our switches, sending that data across the serial port, and now we can do something with it. So let's see what happens. All right, so I'm interested to see. There it is. All right. So as you can see now, when I push a button on the serial monitor, when I push this button, it's saying pin 32 just went low. Now it's saying pin 31 just went low. When I let it go, it goes high. This data is going across the serial port. Anything else that is monitoring the serial port can intercept the same data. Now, we can get more fancy with it. Remember, today we're just scratching the surface. You could wrap these in XML tags, right, so that you can say pin number, switch state, Arduino name. You can put as much data as you want. But the bare minimum, we need to know what switch changed and what state that switch is in. But as of now, yay, we've done an Arduino program. Who cares? The data does nothing. We need to do something with that data. So now what we're going to tell ChatGPT to do is to write the second part of it. All right. Write a C# console app that takes this data and writes it to the console when received. So now we've switched completely. The beauty of this is because of the conversation, it knows the format of that data. It knows that there are going to be two values, comma separated. It knows the first value is the pin number. It knows the second value is the pin state. So when I said build this C# application, it has knowledge of the information that's coming across that serial port and is going to handle it accordingly. So now I can take this, copy it, come over to Visual Studio, And I'm just going to overwrite this. And let's hit, let's see, we have to turn off the serial monitor or they will clash. We're going to start this. All right, let's see what happens, if anything. All right, so let's see, Arduino serial read, data is received. Let's say we probably need to ask it to pause. It's quite possible that it's running very fast, we're not even seeing it. So let's tell Arduino, ChatGPT, hey, slow this down, wait for me to press a button, and let's see what happens. Add a pause after the data is received and printed. All right, so we're going to take this new code, but you can see there that, oh, and there's another problem here, COM3. That may be another thing that was hanging it up. It doesn't know what COM port the Arduino is connected to, so we do have to make those small adjustments. And again, that's why I say it's not a silver bullet. It'll get you about 90–95% there, but then you still have to make some little tweaks. So let's take this, copy, paste, and then let's change that COM3 to COM22, and let's see what happens. All right, we've got a console application. All right, I'm going to actually back this out. We're going to run this one that's prepared. I'm going to shortcut us a little bit because we're almost out of time. This is one basically going through that iterative process to say, okay, when I receive a key press from the Arduino, write that to the landing gear, right? Using FSUIPC. ChatGPT has knowledge of SDKs. It's incredible. If you want to interact with ProSim, same thing. Take the data that's received on the serial port and generate a function that writes this data to and from ProSim. It will even look up the data refs and put the appropriate data refs in place. It's amazing. Now, keep in mind, ChatGPT is unaware of things that happened prior to, I think, 2021. Someone keep me honest here? Perfect. So if you're asking it things that it doesn't understand real time, it's been trained on data that's only as new as 2021. So anything that's been out there longer than that, largely you can reference that. But again, now if I go into my flight sim, same thing. I asked it the same prompts. I said, hey, when the landing gear changes, write that position back to my application. So I'm going to unslew, change the landing gear. What we should see here is you can see the landing gear position just changed to 0. I'm just pressing the letter G, right? Press it again. It goes to 16,383, and we can do this for any variable that we want. Any variable that we want. I'm going to show one more example, and then I'm going to pause here and open for questions. I'm just going to say, I'm going to try something kind of obscure. Say, read the serial port and write the values to the weather radar in ProSim, then write the data to the landing gear in FSUIPC. So I just kind of gave it a complex request there. It says here, I want to read this. Integrating weather radar into ProSim and landing gear into FSUIPC involves interfacing with those specific software and their respective APIs. Great, excellent. So you can see here that it has, I set ProSim, it refined it to ProSim 737 connector and established a connection to the ProSim API. I would have to make sure that the dynamic link libraries are added to the reference and that kind of thing, but you can see that this is an incredible accelerator. And I can tell you some of the features. So I'm the developer of an interface called Serial Bytes, which is actually for integrating OEM parts. And I can tell you that within the last 6 months, probably half of the features were either fully or partially written by generative AI. Things that I've been able to accomplish in a day that may have taken a week to do between refining and looking up the commands and QA testing, et cetera. So I'll pause here. We've got about 10 minutes left. I really appreciate your time and attention, and I'm happy to open the floor for any questions. Yes, sir. Wow, that's a great. Have I tried using ChatGPT with MobiFlight? I have not tried ChatGPT with MobiFlight. Do they have an SDK or an API? Do you know? Okay. Okay. If it has a software API and it's more than 2 years old, more than likely ChatGPT knows about it. I have found, MobiFly has been really powerful for their point and click interface, but I know there's a lot of, scripting and things of that nature that you can do. Like let's say your transformations. Sometime we're trying to, something comes in as in radians and you need it in degrees. And there's things like that for your transformations. You could ask it, hey, I'm getting this value, and we've had that happen with like rudder trim. It comes in as like 0.0002. We say, okay, take this value and give me a formula that will convert this into degrees, and it spits that out in seconds. So great question. Other questions? Yes. Okay. So just repeating the question, how do I safeguard against the mistakes that ChatGPT might make? I'll hit on one point. There's something called hallucinations that you may have heard before. Sometimes ChatGPT will hallucinate and provide an answer that it is 100% sure is right and is completely wrong. What I have found is that just effective QA, just like just now, it provided me a program. I pushed a button. It did not work because it didn't know to use the pull-up resistors. So I think it instead of spending 80% of my time developing, I might spend 20 or 30% of my time developing, another 10% kind of QAing and correcting and revising the work from ChatGPT, but the net savings is still phenomenal. But to answer your question, you have to QA everything that it does to just make sure that the answers make sense. Yes, sir. See, you just hit on something. Oh my goodness, you just hit on something. So, one of the things that I love to talk about is the synergy between AI and humans. A lot of people in a lot of industries feel like AI is coming for my job. In fact, there was a headline that said that. AI is coming for your job. I was like, holy cow, that's kind of personal, right? And I would say it very differently, exactly what you just said. What AI is more than likely going to do is reduce the value of those repetitive things that it is good at. If you're a lawyer and you spend 6 hours of your day reading through long documents, looking for certain keywords, it will reduce the value of those things. But it will increase the value of those things that are uniquely human. For instance, if a customer calls in and they say, like, I had a problem with a flight recently. When I called in, I wasn't very happy. I said, you bumped me from a full fare flight and treated me like a standby passenger. ChatGPT or AI says, please hold while we connect you to our cancellations department. I'm like, this is not what I want. I am upset. I want a refund. It said, please hold while we connect you with refunds. It's very binary. It's mechanical. A human would know, hey, this guy on the other end of this phone sounds really upset. Let me do something for him or her. Maybe it's not just a refund. Maybe it's a complimentary ticket. Maybe, hey, let me get you a couple meal vouchers so while you're at the airport, you can have a comfortable time. These are the things that would make me feel better as a human. So again, AI, will it replace humans? Not likely. But it will make those characteristics that are uniquely human just that much more valuable. Yes? Absolutely. In fact, companies are now getting their own private instances of ChatGPT. Let's say you're in the medical field, and you need to be able to crunch through you're in supply chain, and you need to look through supply chain records to see how many times have I ordered this part and where have I sent it to. You can literally train ChatGPT on your PDFs, and it will be able to do the same process just as fast with your personal data. So my understanding of basically how ChatGPT came around is that they used all the publicly available information they could find on the internet, PDFs, HTML documents, Excel spreadsheets, anything that's out there, train the model on it, and now the model has knowledge of those things. You could ask it questions about aviation. It's been trained on how to fly airplanes. It's been trained on how to be a mechanic, and all from the data that's out there on the free internet. No, and that's why this is potentially one of the biggest revolutions since the Industrial Revolution, because we've always said that AI and ML are not a magic box. Well, now it kind of is, because the companies like Microsoft owns this technology now have literally gone through the process of training it on everything publicly available that they could snag up, so you don't have to train it. Some of the things you ask it are just unbelievable. The things that it knows about history, about technical excellence, about engineering, about medical science, it is unbelievable what you can ask it. So to answer your question, you don't have to train it unless it is on data that is private and uniquely your own data. But like all of this, the ProSim SDK, the Sim Connect, all of that's out there in the public domain, so it knows about all of that. Yes, sir. That I don't know. I will say that money, that's the answer to everything, right? Okay. Okay, thank you. Oh, repeat the question? Okay. Sorry, so the question that was asked, I think, was, the data out there is like 3 years old now. So, how do we make it current? A couple of things I'll say on that. If you pay, you can train it on your data. So that gives it more of that up-to-date immediacy. There's also become a wide community of developers that are now taking, for instance, the like ChatGPT 4.0 and integrating it into their solutions so it can do things like advanced mathematical calculations. And I think there's some out there that do give it more, I could be wrong on this, but they give it a little bit more access to data that's a little bit newer. But the underlying ChatGPT, the data is like 3 years old. Now, this is my personal opinion. Because of how game-changing this is, I think it's a fairly short matter of time before you start seeing generative AI solutions that can access more real-time data. But for now, again, if you have your private instance and you train it on that data, it's as up-to-date as the data that you train it on. Other questions? These are great questions, by the way. Thank you. Yes, sir. Well, it's more than 3 years old. So the question: if the data out there is 3 years or older, how does it know about things like Flight Simulator? Right? So like for instance, Flight Simulator, Sim Connect, FSU IPC, Sim Avionics, ProSim, all these have been out there for quite some time, right? So if you were to ask it about Flight Sim 2024, it would hell, let's try it. Let's ask it. We can literally say, when will FS 2024 be released? And you'll see it'll come back and transparently tell you, I don't have access to real-time information. My knowledge is cut off in September 2021. Look at that. Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 had been released. So I guess to answer your question, if it was around at that time, then it got trained on it. But if it happened since then, it doesn't know. Mm-hmm. Right. That's right. So you said things like FSU IPC that have been updated over time. Maybe some addresses have changed. Maybe some things have changed, right? That is a limitation. That's another thing that you would have to check is it could come back with information that's dated. But what I have found is, even in the example I just showed with the landing gear, originally it came back with the wrong address, the wrong offset. But it literally was a 30-second operation to just copy and paste the new offset versus the time it would have taken to write all the code from scratch. So to your point, definitely a limitation. If something is changed or evolved in the last 3 years, ChatGPT wouldn't know, but it'll oftentimes get you so close that the time it takes to fill that gap is a lot smaller than the time to build the whole solution. Let me just check time. I think we're just about at time. Do we have time for 1 or 2 more questions? Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Thank you. My pleasure. Yes. It is very hard. So the question, picking up the old parts from the flight simulator, like for instance these parts, are they hard to find? They're very, very hard to find. Most of the parts in my flight simulator I've only seen once or twice in 20 years. It takes checking various internet sites, oftentimes 2 to 3 times a day, to find one part every 6 months or so. And these guys are shaking their head like, you're the one who stole that auto brake switch from me. And they'll tell you the good stuff oftentimes sells within the hour. So you have to check regularly. There are a lot of people out there building. Imagine if there are 1,000 people building 737s and an IRS panel pops up, it's gone, especially if it's inexpensive. Yes. Hey, last question.
You used ChatGPT to help you find those parts?
That's actually a great idea. And that's, as the last question, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I'll make the last question to ChatGPT. You know what? I'm not going to ask it in front of everybody. But that's a great, because literally you could ask the question, if I'm looking for old or mothballed aircraft parts, where could I look? And it'll come back and it'll give you the names of companies and say, hey, the following companies specialize in, reselling aircraft parts. So I'll try that later tonight. Great suggestion. So, hey, I really want to thank this audience. You've been a phenomenal audience. I really enjoyed talking about the subject with you. Hope you have a great rest of the day. Oh, last thing I'll say, again, my name is Robert Prather. More pictures of my simulator at 777simulator.com. It's a Facebook site. Like me, follow me. You'll see pictures of the integration work we're doing right now. 777simulator.com. Love to connect with any of you. Thank you.